You're listening to The Writing Affliction with Kat and Katz. Why did we do this exactly?
I think we wanted to geek out about books and writing and share what we've learned with others.
Yeah, that's exactly right. During the pandemic, we both found our way back to writing, which I think we've also both loved, but careers kind of took the precedent of it and just kind of, got on like ducks in water.
Yeah. Actually, I think I kind of stalked you on Reddit. Until I'm like, hi, I like your writing. I like your stories. We're friends now. You have to keep me. I'm a barnacle. I'm going to cling to you. Okay, you've kept me. Cool. Which is literally how I think it happened.
Yeah, 5 years later, it's still the case. I don't think people quite understand just how much fun writing is. And for such a long time, I think that people were afraid to tell anyone else that they wrote fan fiction. But I actually think that the pandemic really changed that. People felt a lot more comfortable um, kind of opening up about what they did to, hold on to the threads of their mental health. And yeah, Ruby and I met because I got back into an anime that I had liked when I was much younger and started writing for it. And, the rest is history. Now we still write for that anime. But obviously, both of us have kind of taken this next step and have branched out into original stories and original books where, I take a fantasy bent with some romance in it, and Ruby takes a romance bent with some romance and some fantasy in it. And so here we are, talking on our first podcast specifically about what made us want to make the jump, and in particular, kind of celebrating fan fiction, which is obviously where we met.
I think for me, making the jump is some of the stories that I wrote or wanted to write didn't really fit in with the fandom. And now I know that you could sit there and say, hey, it's a story. You can make anything work. But there's a difference between when you're being true to the character and you're being true to the source, and when you're saying, I really want to write this original story, but just do characters that people are kind of familiar with. And some of the stories that I was working on kind of seemed like the second one, where it's okay, yeah, I'm writing the story. It's a really cool story, but I'm putting characters people know to try and say, hey, you like this, right? Hey, you like it. And then I went, maybe there's a broader audience than just the fandom. So let me try publishing it.
Fandom is a kind of amazing space because you kind of get to like walk into somebody else's playground, and you go into your side of the sandbox and you build up your own sand castle or your own swing set, and then you go, hey everybody in this playground, does anyone want to play with me? And it feels really great when people say that. And yeah, I think that good stories and good characters can draw us in. And we say like, okay, I'm absolutely in love with this particular style of character, and I want to tell a story about that. And really fast, you kind of find yourself pushing against the bounds of what the original story is. And it doesn't take very long to realize that not only have you pushed out of the boundaries, you've walked out of the boundaries down through several canyons and are coming out the other side.
Yeah. But it's also, I think, like for a while there, and this is what you were talking about earlier, it seemed like up until the pandemic, there was almost a taboo of if you wrote fan fiction and then you made the move into traditional publishing, you stayed quiet about it. Nobody wanted to talk about it because fan fiction was looked down upon. Well, then during the pandemic, so many people suddenly, because of the shutdown, had time to read, had time to look, time to explore. I mean, that's when I originally started posting fan fiction back in 1999 and then stopped for about 20 years after I graduated college. Yes, I'm old. I'm dating myself. It's fine. Um, but then with the pandemic, I found myself like lost and wanting to be part of a community. So I started writing for a community that I enjoyed, for a fan fiction that I enjoyed. And now we're starting to see so many fan fiction get turned into traditional publishing. So a lot of people will sit there and say, "Oh, well, you're a fan fiction author. That's not quite the same as traditional publishing." But it really, and it is. You're telling a story. And in some ways, I think that with the fan fiction, it's a lot more nuanced than you see in a lot of the traditional publishing, or it's more akin to what you would see for the romantasy novels that you write, Kat, where where they have the big epic sagas. They have the villain that they're fighting against. They have the grand tale, the grand purpose. And people are starting to look at the fan fiction and go, hey, that's a very valid training ground.
Yes. We sit and look at some of sort of the fan fiction that people kind of always thought of first when they thought of a fan fiction that was getting transitioned into an original work was something like 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James, which was a pretty famous fan fiction of Edward and Bella from Twilight. And thinking that given sort of what that story was, that must be what all fan fiction is like. But kind of simultaneous to that, that book sold real well.
It
A
did.
lot of people, it didn't read like the original at all when it sort of came out. You would not necessarily know that that was originally something from Twilight. Um, and I think it sort of probably gave publishers a little notion about the fact that there was this untapped market. And it's been really interesting recently that not only have we seen fan fiction sort of no longer being something that's taboo to authors to do, but instead something that authors and creators kind of pretty proudly proclaim, oh yeah, I got my start in fan fiction. That we're now seeing this boom in fan fiction to original fiction stories. And I think that in that there are both really good things about that, and there are some things that I know the fan community in particular is a little bit worried about, especially around fair use, etc.
Yeah, and it's the fair use is an interesting argument and an interesting conundrum when you think about how fair use differs in every single nation across the world. Like here in the US, we have a very broad definition of fair use. So if you're giving tribute or if you're being a parody, you can use somebody else's intellectual property without really any problems or complications unless you're trying to say, hey, I've taken these characters, this other person did it, and I wrote this story. Buy this story. You can't sell it for profit. But you go to countries like Australia, parody is not a valid form of fair use. And so becomes a legal question of when is it fair use and when is it not? And that's why there's kind of like this conundrum regarding fan fiction in general. Meanwhile, you have a lot of other authors going, please give me fan fiction. That tells me you guys love my stories. And then you have other people who are like, if you give me fan fiction, if you write fan fiction, I will send you a cease and desist.
Yeah, which is funny because I don't think there's been an original story since human beings learned how to speak language and sat around campfires telling stories to each other. So the idea that that something and that's where obviously the lines get a little bit blurry is what is inspiration, what is attribution, and what is copyright infringement. And I think you have a really good point, which is that fair use sort of sits in this place in the United States that's just a little bit not nebulous, but people are wary in it
Mm-hmm.
because overall, like there was a time before, for instance, the most popular site, Archive of Our Own, right now was out, where people were getting cease and desist, specifically from the author Anne Rice, for writing fan fiction of her works, and it meant that there was this time when people were looking at, for instance, fanfiction.net, that every single author said, "These characters do not belong to me. Gosh, please don't sue me," as disclaimers on the top of their stories, because in the United States, it is actually legal to write as long as you are not making a profit off of it. But that did not stop authors from, from seeking to remove the stories their fans were writing. And my personal take on fan fiction in general, specifically for like, my works, is that I will be so excited and so happy to hear people are writing fan fictions of the works that I make, but I will never look at them. Again, coming back down to this idea of copyright, which is I don't want to be in a position where I had the same idea and was writing something in a series that a fan had written. Because if I look at that, do I really have a way to prove that that was originally my idea? And you can look at a lot of famous author sites where they actually have disclaimers like this. Brandon Sanderson is a really good example where basically authors don't, they want you to write and to share and to have your space and to celebrate the works that you are a fan of, but they're not going to come into those spaces with you because, again, for us, um, the issue of fair use goes both ways. If you write a story, the ideas that are not originally part of the intellectual property that you are borrowing from, like characters, are yours. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's a fence that we put in place that goes both ways. I I'm never going to send fan fiction that I wrote to the original creators. And I'm never going to look at fan fiction written about my books for exactly the same reason, because that that boundary is in place to keep both of us safe.
And then it goes to one of the things that one of my friends is in the writing community is dealing with right now. She had written her sequel to her story and has it with the editor, and then reads another story by an author that she and I both follow, that we both love, that has it has a similar premise, because we both write MMA stories, and it had a very similar where it was the MMA fighter and a romance writer. Well, then the issue was she had a nickname for one of the opponents in the game, in her book. And then the book that she just read used that exact same nickname. And so now she's like, how do I show that I did it first? I now need to go back and change it. And so that's that whole thing with, like, if somebody writes fan fiction off of any of our stories, the authors usually are not going to read it, because if they read anything and they get inspired by it, or they say, that's a really cool premise, I want to work with that, who owns that idea? Is that idea now the author's, or is it the person who wrote the fan fiction? If you write the same story, is that inspired by, or does that fall into plagiarism? If they're using the exact same wording, then it falls into plagiarism. If they sit there and say, this person had this great idea that inspired me, so I went in this direction, that's an attribution. So there's a whole lot of nuance when people are reading others' stories and they're like about their own story, really, that then creates this whole other quagmire.
Yes. Um, and we're not here if we don't talk about the platinum blonde haired elephant in the room. That is one of the reasons that Ruby and I decided, you and I decided we were going to do this podcast, was because right now, in the year 2025, I think I have seen three and maybe four stories that are based and marketed as being based on an intellectual property and a fan fiction, which is, I don't know whether any of you have heard of the book Alchemized, but that has been pretty openly marketed as a book that is based on Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger in Harry Potter. And so that was originally a fan fiction. Again, there are a lot of fan fictions that become stories, that become originals. And oftentimes they're even fan fictions that become stories that people kind of know were fan fictions originally. But for the most part, publishers have not been explicitly and openly marketing those things as being fan fiction. Where I think the one change we saw this year is that people actually started to market things explicitly as fan fictions of original big popular IPs. And Ruby, I don't know about you, but that scares me.
It kind of does, and it also kind of doesn't in some ways, because to me, it means that it gives you more opportunities to be seen and more opportunities for people to look at. I mean, let's face it, traditional publishing in general has changed, and that probably is in a large part due to, one, how easy it is to self-publish these days, and I'll be flat out honest, I'm a self-published author. But two, it's there are so many different avenues between archive of our own where you don't get any income from it, I know a lot of people who write traditional novels who are on Wattpad, but the original way of getting into traditional publishing was you had to query an agent, which is go out there with your story, your hat in your hand, go, please like me enough to take a chance on me. You get an agent who works with you in editing your book. Then the agent sends it out to publishers. And then the publishers go, well, we don't think that'll sell. We think this will sell. We don't think that will sell, but we're interested in this. Can you change this? And so it was a long, drawn out process. And so with the fan fiction and people now seeing, hey, I have this fan fiction that has 500,000 kudos. I don't think anything on AO3 has 500,000 kudos unless it's that I Am Groot fan fiction. But
Brilliant transformative
it's
work.
an absolutely brilliant. It's literally just I Am Groot. And it is the depth of the emotion in that I Am Groot is amazing.
It's
but
brilliant.
it absolutely is brilliant. But you can have like several, like 20, 30,000 kudos, which is AO3's way of saying they like a story. And now the publishers are like, hey, there's a market here for this. Because some of the best stories that I've written aren't traditionally published books. They're not self-published books. They're fan fiction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how we found each other, because we found, oh, this person writes really creative stuff in this fandom that I like, with the blorbos that I like. And I have to say that there is something I'm worried about, and that's more sort of like in this economy and with this particular Supreme Court, which is if we get to the point where publishers are blatantly marketing based on somebody else's intellectual property, does it become a case where the fan fiction becomes more and more commodified? Because my fear is if it becomes more and more commodified, and suddenly, the question of whether somebody is doing something, or for instance, the archive that houses most of it, are doing things that have a profit bent, suddenly you don't have your argument that this is fair use anymore in the United States. And we could become like Australia, where writing about your favorite characters, if they're not in the public domain, becomes illegal unless you pay the intellectual property, the owner, some money to be able to do that. And part of the thing about fan fiction and fandom that is so amazing is it's one of these places that capitalism can't quite hit it the way that it wants to, because the people who put these works out put them out for free. They put them out because they're passion projects and things that they feel so deeply inside of them that they just want to talk about it and bring it out and show people and say something. On top of it, it is also a place where, fandom is such an incredible queer space. And it's been a place where, while traditional publishing has often turned away from anything that is not cisgendered, heterosexual relationships, fan fiction is where people have been able to explore identities that they did not feel safe exploring elsewhere. And so, at least to me, and like Ruby, you have more knowledge of this than I do, which is awesome. Tell me whether or not my worries can be assuaged specifically about that. And specifically, again, given who we have sitting and making decisions that could include what is fair use.
If you look at things like Alchemized, if you look at stories like Love Hypothesis, which also started off as a fan fiction, the one group that you're not hearing say, based off of the fan fiction, blah, 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 is the publisher. In the advertisement by the author, in the news articles that are written or about the author, that's where they're saying it. But the publishers are being very, very careful not to say adaptation of the Dramione, adaptation of the Kylo Ren, adaptation of this fan fiction. So I think that the publishers are still wary of that, because then if it comes out and the publisher starts saying, we're publishing this fan fiction that is based off of this fandom, the original author of the fandom could come back and say, no, you can't, because that still my intellectual property. But then it becomes a question of, if they've now changed the characters, is that now an original story, or is it still too closely tied to the fandom? So it becomes a very interesting little thing that I don't think the publishers have any interest in going towards right now. But I do think that when somebody is trying to go and get an agent, when they're trying to go through like Query Tracker, or they're reaching out to the agencies, if they say, this is an adaptation, I write fan fiction. I have this many people who follow me. And now, granted, in the fandom that you and I met in, I don't think that's ever going to be one of the ones that's big enough that people are going to say, hey, these people have 500,000 people following them. Not that anybody does on AO3. I'm just throwing out that number. Maybe I should pay attention to them and look at their stories. Because it's
Yeah.
another way of saying, like when you're doing a query, they're asking, do you have a website? Do you have a TikTok? Do you have an Instagram? Do you have a Facebook page? How many followers do you have on any of those? If you've published any books, how many of your books have sold? Because they're looking to see that you've built a community, that you've built people who follow you.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense to want to see if you have put in some amount of work to find your audience. I guess the thing that always worries me is I don't want to write for the really, really big fandoms. I just don't have the interest. Like nothing about the Marvel universe has ever interested me enough to actually want to sit down and like write about, two people in it falling in love. Um, so I hope we don't see something where people start to work toward writing in these really big, already rich get richer, big fandoms to hope that they can get that audience because that's where the audience is. Um,
I don't think we're going to be seeing that. And this is just maybe my take on it and my read, because even with the number of stories that have become fan fiction, and I'll be flat out honest, I've taken a fan fiction that I've written and I modified it before publishing it. But it was already an adaptation of another work that I was very blatantly open about, like it's an adaptation of Sense and Sensibility that changes who Marianne winds up with because Brandon deserved better. And that's a rant for another day.
oh,
But
trust me, dear listeners, we are definitely going to be doing a follow-up of this on how to turn a fan fiction into an original and public domain and fair use and all of that wonderful stuff.
that is a
And
fandom
you
for
should go
another
read,
case.
and you should definitely go read Ruby's book.
But like there are several million, or probably like maybe, I don't even know how many, let's see, how many stories are there on Archive of Our Own? There are over 16 million works as of December 26, 2025. So as of yesterday. Of those, I think of the traditionally published, we're talking maybe 15, 20. So while we're hearing about it now more, when you look at it from the grand scheme of how many fan fiction are there, it's a very small amount. I think what we're seeing more is fan fiction authors who got trained in writing and fan fiction are now making the leap over to become traditionally published.
Which is honestly a really great thing.
And I think that part of that does come from, as we were saying before, it's a really great training. Like if you're trying to learn the beats, if you're trying to learn how to create and craft a story that has people coming back time after time to read the next chapter, to see what's going to happen, that's all training for when you're doing traditional writing. And when you look at things like Inkit and Galatea, which are basically chapter by chapter publishing, that's essentially taking the AO3 model, not making it fandom based, but turning it into monetizing that chapter by chapter publishing.
You see that in several of the light novels that are coming out of both China and Japan too, is a lot of places are going to this chapter by chapter based thing and seeing some publishing success from that.
Yep.
One of my favorite anime, which I'm not writing for, I will say, so don't look for me, is the Apothecary Diaries, which is coming out of a light novel.
Yeah, I might be writing an Apothecary Diaries at some point, but that's just me because
Oh,
I love the characters. She's such a perfect cat. She's a perfect cat.
A grumpy cat gremlin and her like eternal simp.
Yes.
So good. Yeah.
But
It's I think that on top of it, let's talk about, fandom culture for a second too. At least we'll talk about the light side of fandom culture and we'll leave the dark side of fandom culture aside for now, which is if you start writing and you're having fun, the standard way that commenters behave on Archive of Our Own in particular, the culture is around positivity. And so can you imagine you're this, new young author, you're really, really excited. You've become massively inspired by, given that I said I don't do Marvel, Stucky, which is Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes.
Wait, that's a
And
thing?
you, I know, and you write your first chapter and you put your first chapter online and suddenly you get a comment where someone's like, oh, three triple hearts, this is amazing, I'm so excited. That's going to make you want to write more. And I think that, in particular, Archive of Our Own has really developed this culture of positivity and encouragement where a lot of people are not only getting their start writing, starting to, and writing is just like any other thing you practice. The more you practice, the better at it you're going to get. So you're sitting there and you're practicing and you're doing this work and you're writing this story and you're putting these chapters out and you're getting this encouragement from people about how they can't wait to see what the next chapter is, how you, tore their heart out and ate it in front of them because of the fact that you made a story that hurt them so badly in just the right ways.
And you're sitting there giggling about it the entire time.
Yes. Yeah. Like we've both definitely had those like mustache twirling like moments where we know what plot twist we have coming up in our stories is. So it's really fun to know that that's how could you not want to get started like that? And again, when in a following episode, we will be talking about sort of what changes when you're starting to go really truly into originals from this. But like talk about a really great incubated culture for getting good writing and good writers out there. On top of it, like let's just be frank, the spicy scenes and the sexy scenes from fan fiction are the masterclass where you should be looking if you're trying to write spicy, smutty, or sexy scenes. I'll say in several of the romantasy books that I've read as part of like thinking about my own writing, oftentimes the highest compliment I could pay the smut was, wow, this reads like fan fiction, because some of the best sex you're going to read is in fan fiction.
I mean,
People are real good at consent.
I just finished writing a 3-chapter sex scene for a fan fiction that I'm writing, and you don't see that in traditional publishing. Like usually, like even with the most explicit novel that I've read, a lot of times I'm like, okay, this is really cool, and wait, that's it?
I mean,
where's the rest of it?
Yeah, 50 Shades of Grey. It's not a surprise that a book that is basically all smut is from fan fiction. And don't get me started on like the issues with consent and BDSM that book does not do well and all of that. But it's such a good training ground to start to get you into that mindset of being able to publish and think about publishing original works. And Ruby has actually convinced me that my concerns about, something like Alchemized coming from Manacled I might be more of a doom brainer than you are on this, which is probably a good thing.
It probably is because like with some of the fan fiction, sometimes it's still kept up and sometimes it is removed. Like 50 Shades of Grey, the original Twilight fan fiction, last I heard, is still up. I have no idea. I've never looked at it. I have no desire to look at it.
Same.
But just it's still out there. Some other fan fictions that have been translated, you go back and you edit it. Like I have one right now that I'm publishing in the fandom that I have every intention on making a traditionally published and publishing it one day. But I also know that like there's an entire third of a plot that I've created that does not work in the fandom because the characters, that's just not going to work for them. But when I go back and prepare it to go to regular publication, I get to add that third back in.
Yeah. I did something very similar. For me, it was actually that I had a off-the-wall zany plot that I had originally envisioned as a fan fiction that I realized worked better as an original, and I got to go back and be like, "Oh, I get to do this as an original." It's I think that the idea that you can't actually transition a fan fiction into an original work, like, no, that's not true. Dante Alighieri did it. Lancelot is probably a fan fiction of Arthur that includes a self-insert. Like, this has been something that has been happening as long as human beings have existed. We have written fan fictions of fan fictions of fan fictions of fan fictions of fan fictions. Ideas are things that that are not original, but what you end up taking and doing with them is what comes into the originality. I think the only reason that fan fiction has gotten a stigma and has had, you know, has been such a controversial and almost like stop point, or copyright has been almost a stop point to creativity, is because copyright came in to, number one, protect people's intellectual property, but one of the other things that it did was it stopped that cycle and that cycle of fan fiction, of fan fiction, of fan fiction, of fan fiction.
Mm-hmm. Like I've seen, now granted, is that saying that all fan fiction is amazing and wonderful? I would love to be able to say that. I can't say that.
No.
There have been some stories that I have read where I'm looking at it, and now, granted, my mind works a little bit differently than most people. Kat can tell you. I will pretty much remember anything that I've read at least once. And so I was reading this story and I'm looking at it and I'm like, wait a minute, I know this entire plot. And the person said, oh, I took this fan fiction. I'm getting this idea from this other fan fiction author. I loved her story so much, so I'm adapting it. And I'm looking at them going, okay, but none of you guys are also acknowledging the fact that you have literally taken word for word the entire plot of Nora Roberts' The Winning Hand and just changed the character names.
Yeah, that's the thing about it is, again, the difference between inspired by, the difference between adapted from, and the difference between to plagiarism. And yeah, we can definitely attest to the fact that not every fan fiction is being written to be a traditionally published book. Um, and they shouldn't be. They don't have to be. Sometimes you just want to see your two favorite characters washing dishes together. And that's probably not going to be something that anyone's going to want to pick up and publish. But that doesn't matter because it still is probably making you happy. And it's going to make a lot of other people happy who are also in love with those characters and just want to see what their day-to-day life is like.
I will say that for one thing I've noticed between fan fiction and traditional publishing, and I guess in some ways I got used to fan fiction thinking that was kind of the norm. If you're writing in a fandom that has a built-in loyal base, no, your first story is not going to get traction. Your second story is not going to get traction, but your third story or your first long story is going to have people sitting up and going, "Hey, who are you? Can we come see you? Can we come read your stuff? Can we come talk to you?" Or if you're like me, just slide into their DMs going, "Hi, I'm a barnacle now. You're not getting rid of me."
The motivation of that, the motivation
it is so
so
motivating.
good.
You don't have that when you're in traditional publishing because you've gone from, like, say, in the fandom that we write for or that we met in, maybe there's 200 authors currently for it because it's an older fandom. And granted, there was a resurgence of it during the pandemic, but it's still an older fandom. So if you're around it enough, people are going to notice you and people are going to start and as long as you write stories they want to read, I will caveat that, or that they enjoy reading, people are going to want to follow you. But if you go into traditional publishing, you're now one in millions.
It's very hard to not the change is stark, between, because your audience becomes kind of no one. No
Yeah.
one knows who you are. No one knows whether or not the thing that you're doing or falling in love with, is something that they want to commit the time and the attention to. Which, like, let's add just one more awesome reason why fan fiction is amazing is that despite the fact that we've both made a swap over and are starting to work in writing original stories, we still get to carry some of those wonderful friends that we've made, in the fandom with us because they remember us and they know us from the writing we did in that fandom. And oftentimes they'll throw us a bone and read our original works. And that, again, is really, really motivating.
It also helps because when you're trying out a story and being like, "Hi, I have this cockamamie story. I don't know if anybody's going to want to read it. Can I bounce this idea off of you?" People would be like, "Yes, please. Please, please,
Yes.
please come talk to us. Please come talk to us." And so it does help because it creates that writing community. And honestly, I don't think I would have anything published if I didn't already have people like you that I could go to and be like, "I can't do this. This is hard. Nobody's reading my
How are
book."
we going to make this Bratva romance work?
Yeah, let's not go there. I'm a little bit testy about that one right now. But no, I do have, that's what I'm going to be working on as soon as we're done with this podcast, just trying to really go back and see what else I can work into it. But it does help to have people to brainstorm with. It helps to have people to plot with, and people that you know and that you like their writing and you like their work. Like, we've written stories together. Kat and I have written stories together in our fandom.
Mhm.
And so we know the way that the other one thinks. We know that the way the other one approaches things. So I know that I can go to her and be like, I have this crazy cockamamie story. Help me make it make sense. Because she is a plotter and I am a massive pantser, where I tend to sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to sit and I'm going to write this story. And the story goes, that's not what we're writing. So you're going this way. And I go, okay, cool. We're going to follow the story now. And then you go to Kat, and Kat's like, oh, please, no, I will twitch if you do that to me.
Yeah. So for those of you wondering, plotter and pantser. A pantser is not, a middle school bully who likes to, take
Pants
take
people.
down the britches of their of people that they're being mean to. It's writers who fly by the seat of their pants, writers who kind of like, I think it's probably could be called vibe writers. I think I've heard that too, or inspiration writers. It's folks who need to sit down and get pen to paper and actually write out the story to start to see where the story is going to go. And I just happen to have a brain that is, neuroatypical. So I will not let something go until I know I have some sense of an entire arc that works, that satisfies my brain as being complete. And so, yeah, Ruby and I have a really, really good time sort of sitting down and like working with each other and solving each other's problems. Like, Ruby gets to listen to me be like, I don't know how to name this prince. And it's like, in the scheme of things, that shouldn't be a big deal. But to my brain is like, no, you can't write a single word until you know the name of the prince, Kat.
And then you have me, where it's like, I tend to sit down and be like, okay, we're going to sit and figure out what we're starting to write. All right, cool. I've got 3 chapters in. Where am I going from here? Kat! Which happens quite a lot, I'll admit.
It's a lot of fun.
But
so, why don't we do a TLDR, too long didn't read, for the summation of what we're saying today for you. Number 1, if you're thinking about getting into writing, you definitely want to consider dipping your toes into fan fiction. It is such a great place to start. It is a really supportive community, and especially if you are in the United States and you're doing it for free, it is not illegal and there is nothing wrong with doing it. Trust me, it is worth it.
it definitely is. And it can be a really great training ground. And if you're somebody who's interested in getting into writing, whether it's fan fiction or traditional publishing, write. That's the best way to really start. It's like one of the best phrases I've ever heard is begin, the rest is easy. Because you never know how hard it is until you're sitting there staring at that blank page with that blinking cursor that just taunts you, and you have no clue what you're going to put on it. But once you get that first word down, then the words start to come. And one of the things that we were saying with the fan fiction, it's great training, because as you're writing, even if you're just writing a story just for you, you're learning from it. What's your style? What's your method?
Exactly. Another good thing to do is read. If you really, really like fan fiction and you really, really like, again, let's say Stucky, read some of the stories in it. And don't just read the ones that have the top kudos or the top amount of attention and the top comments. Read a lot. Number 1, you're going to figure out the things that you like personally, the things that give you a sense of like, sparkly happiness. And you're going to be able to tell the difference between good and bad for you personally. So it's actually going to help inspire you, but also help you write better.
Because you'll find the authors that you now want to say, okay, what is it about their story that keeps having me come back? Why do I keep getting drawn to this fan fiction? Why do I keep getting drawn to this specific author? Is there something with the way that they create their tale that's drawing me in? Let me see how I can do something similar in my own way.
Yeah. So, if you need any encouragement from anybody, take the encouragement for us. Sit down, grab that pen, grab that paper, grab that typewriter, grab that keyboard, grab that phone, and just get that first word on the page. So, Ruby, where can people find you? People
can find me on my website at Our Cats Books. It's KATZEBOOKS.com. And I'm also on Instagram and TikTok as author R Katz.
And you can find me on Blue Sky and on my website of KathrynThornwood.com, KathrynThornwood.com, as well as Blue Sky and Mastodon. And from us, this has been The Writing Affliction with Kat and Katz.